Hi students, welcome to week 5 of business law. This week we're looking at the employer and employee relationship and what that means. So I'm sure plenty of you are most of you be able to relate to this fairly easily because probably by now you've all had jobs of some sort where you've worked for somebody. So let's dive in. Let's take a look at the employer-employee relationships. This is out of, by the way, this is out of chapters 23, 24, and 25. Okay, so the employee process, very simply, the employer is the one who hires someone. The employee, you, are the one receiving the work, and the employer is the one offering the work for pay. And it's usually there's some sort of an employment application that you have to go through. And in my business, where we work, we're a staffing agency. We're very familiar with the application process, resume, background check, etc. So and drug testing is all part of the employment process. So that relationship is usually governed by some sort of contract. You wouldn't be surprised probably by now to know that oftentimes you have to sign like a non-compete agreement, a non-solicitation agreement, and that sort of thing when you go to work for somebody. Now, there is a difference between being an employee and an independent contractor, and we're going to look at that a little bit deeper in a moment here, but usually when you're the employee, you offer you hold your employer with some liability. And then there's some training that goes along with that to help reduce the liability that you have on your employer. Let's go look at now. There's this thing called at-will employment. And I'm not sure exactly what the law is out in Arizona, but in Michigan, employees are considered at will, which means their employment that either the employee or the employer may terminate at any time for any reason. So either you can quit or the employer can quit you. The at-will doctrine, though, is gradually, like I said, it's being modified state by state. It's a state law and does change throughout the 50 states and is changing. So there are some exceptions that are growing to the at-will rule. They've always been there, but they're also getting more popular. So in terms of discharges in violation of the law, any discharge of an employee that goes against some well-defined public policy, you can't, I hope you guys know this, you can't discharge somebody as an employer based on discrimination. You can't do that. So discharge of an employee when there's an implied contract for a period of time. So, if you've signed a contract with an employee, or maybe you're an employee and you've signed a contract with your employer for a 1-year time period, you get it for 1 year, and if there's a breach of contract, then there should be a payout for that as well. Some other exceptions are discharges that violate stated employee policies and practices. So you can get discharged. So even though you're an at-will employee, if you do something expressly against the policy of the company, you could get discharged, all right? But then again, on the other side, the employer, there's termination if it's not done in good faith. Termination is prohibited because of wrongful employer acts. So if your employer does something wrong and you get fired, well, that's considered an exception to the rule. All right, read more about it in that chapter 23. All right, there's this agency relationship that gets created too. So there's this principal-agent relationship created when somebody calls the principal, grants authority to someone called the agent. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but just remember that as an employee, you might be an agent of the company, okay, of your employer. You might not be. We're going to dig a little bit deeper in that in a moment. Some different kinds of agents. There's general agents, special agents, gratuitous agents, and that sort of thing. Read about them in the chapter. But let's look at this idea of employees, an agency, and then independent contractors. So one of the biggest differences between the principal and the agent relationship compared to the employer and the employee relationship is a degree of control. So if as an employee, your employer has hired you and given you a particular box to stay inside of, a scope of work to stay inside of. If you're also an agent of the employer, you may have been given a responsibility to sign off on documents that will hold the company responsible for your signature. In that case, you're acting as an agent. Your degree of control is much greater. Where I work, I sign off on contracts with customers, And but it's because my employer, the person I work for, the president of the company, has made me an agent. He treats me like he's the principal. He treats me like an agent, and so based on my signature, I obligate our company to certain contracts and obligations to those contracts. Now, switch gears. Independent contractor. Might be, think of this as a supplier, perhaps. All right. That's someone hired to perform a task, but not under the direct control of the employer or the business that you're working at. You know, if you bring somebody in to water the lawn, for example, or cut the grass, or do some building maintenance, they're an independent contractor, and whatever they do, whatever their dealings are, doesn't impact your employer. Okay, they're an independent contractor. All right, let's look at this idea of agent authority. There's express authority. There's implied. Like right now, the guy that I work for, the president of the company, has given me expressly, very explicitly, you can sign these kinds of contracts. It's implied that I can spend up a certain amount of money and obligate the company up to a certain amount of money, just based on my word or signature. And then there's emergency and apparent authority as well. Make sure you read about those. And finally, the liability that comes along with this agency responsibility. So the principal is legally liable, that is, say, my boss or the employer is legally liable to third parties for contracts that an agent, like me, makes as long as the agent operates within his or her authority. And the employers or the principal is also responsible for any breach of contracts that I sign, as well as any injuries from torts. Right? We talked about torts being torturous, right? So as long as an agent has the authority to act, then there's no personal responsibility. So when I sign off on an agreement at work, I'm signing on behalf of the company, and I've been given the authority to do that. So I'm an agent of the company to the principal, the owner, and so I am not liable. However, if I went rogue and started signing contracts that I didn't have authority for, then the principal is not bound, but I certainly am. Okay, I'm responsible for those. And generally, the principal is bound by the contracts if the agent acts within their scope of authority. And again, that's usually an expressed or written out or assumed, implied scope of authority. Okay, remember to watch the devotionals. Discussion questions are due on Wednesday and Friday again. Quizzes and assignments are due by Sunday. And look, I fixed that reminders. 1, 2, 3, 4, then 5. All right. Have a great week. Remember, God is on his throne. He's always been there, and he's always going to be, and he loves you.